Next up is VC panel. What would it take for Japan to get on the global VC map? First, let me introduce the speakers on the stage. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Hiroki Yashida, founder and CEO of Silver Trail Partners, who will facilitate this discussion as a moderator. The panelists are Mr. Adam Simpson, venture partner at Fraser Life Sciences. Mr. Ben Auspitz, managing partner for Blackard Fund at Curie Bio. Mr. Brian Matesic, principal at Northwest Venture Partners. Dr. Rajiv Dadu, managing partner at SR1 Capital Management. Lastly, Dr. Shinichiro Fuse, partner, managing director at TPG Life Sciences Innovations. Dr. Ashida, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. How are we doing? This is the last session, so let's get through it. So, for who don't know me, my name is Hiroki Ishida, and I'm one of the organizers of this event, and I'll be moderating this session. So, just a quick introduction about myself. I spent almost 9 years at A Rose, a sister fund to F Prime in the US, and recently became independent to be more involved in earlier company building activities. So I think most of you would agree that for Japanese biotechs to advance into the next stage, we would need global investors like yourselves, everyone, to be more engaged in Japanese biotech. I think we've done a good job of bringing you here in Tokyo today. So let's see how that goes. But today's topic is, what would it take for Japan to get on global investors' VC map? So maybe let's start with a quick introduction from you. If you can quickly introduce yourself briefly and about your fund, and just as an icebreaker, name one favorite Japanese food.
Well, I have to go with sushi. I love unagi. Again, I'm Adam Simpson. I'm a venture partner at Fraser Life Sciences. So first about Fraser. Fraser, on the private side, we're investing out of our 12th fund. We announced a fund last year. It's a $1.3 billion US vehicle, about half of our private investments are what we call company creation, which of course we've been talking about today. The other half is just traditional syndicated investment deals. We pair this private strategy with, we also have a later stage private slash crossover slash public fund, which is an evergreen vehicle. And really the idea is to, between the two, whether it's a seed stage financing out of academia or much later, and actually in one example with our public colleagues, we were actually able to take a product that was approved here in Japan and finance in the United States a phase 3 trial to bring that product to the US and effectively go public right away. And so that's an example of the benefit of the later stage fund. Personally, I'm an ex-operator. I grew up doing startups. I most recently ran a company called Icosavax that we sold to AZ a couple of years ago. And then I've also had the pleasure of starting and selling a couple of companies to Takeda.
So hi, I'm Ben Auspitz, and for me it'd be udon. Word about Curie. So there are two fund families under Curie. One of them is a seed fund that will start really very early. So no idea, it's too early for the Curie seed fund. They are really, the purpose of that fund is to work with founders to take things from concept to really a drug candidate, usually preclinical. And there, the co-founder can be an academic, it can be an industrial scientist, or it can be a company. And so many of our Curie seed companies have been formed from early stage, kind of pre-development candidate technologies from an established pharma or biotech. So relevant to the last discussion. Then there's a second fund, a later stage fund, which does more classical translational venture capital, where usually the terminus of that investment is clinical data. So that's Curie. My background, actually like my colleagues, is both on the operating side and on the venture capital side. So I spent a number of years in small company biotech. Most recently, before Curie, was the CEO and co-founder of a cancer company called IDRx, which is also a spin-out company developing targeted kinase inhibitors.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Matesic. I'm a principal at Norwest Venture Partners based in San Francisco. I would say that my favorite food is pork tonkatsu ramen. Actually, fun fact, I served that at my wedding from our favorite restaurant in San Francisco. And my background, and I'll tell you a little bit about my firm. So Norwest Venture Partners has been around a long time. We actually just raised our 17th fund a little over a year ago. It's a $3 billion investment vehicle that we're investing out of. That's multi-sector, multi-strategy. We have a total of $15.5 billion in assets under management from all of our historic funds. And our strategy is really that of a traditional venture capital firm in that we can invest, we have broad flexibility to invest privately from seed company creation all the way through to crossover rounds. From our biotech strategy is really focused on, I'd say, near clinical or clinical stage companies. We've invested across many therapeutic areas. We're very therapeutic area agnostic and stage agnostic. We look across different modalities. We've done everything from gene therapy and ophthalmology to small molecule neuropsych and everything in between. My background, personally, I trained as a physician, went to Stanford for medical school, then spent some time in consulting at McKinsey, and then was an investor at Blackstone Life Sciences prior to joining Norwest.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. So as was mentioned, my name is Rajiv Dadu. I'm one of the managing partners at SR1. A little bit about SR1. So it's a venture capital group that's been around since the early days of biotech. The group was started in 1985, shortly after Genentech. And for example, SR1 invested in Amgen in the early days. Most of that as part of large pharma, GlaxoSmithKline, so until 2020. Even though we were part of GSK, we weren't necessarily constrained to investing only in areas of GSK interest. We could invest more broadly. But irrespective, in 2020, we spun out from GSK into a fully independent group and have raised several funds since then and so forth, and investing as an independent entity, as are some of the groups represented here. Our interests are quite broad, investing from new co-creation, which we do ourselves, to public companies at the opposite end of the spectrum, across therapeutic areas, across modalities, and across geographies. And certainly it's great to be here. We have had some history of investing in Japan, including even 20 years ago, for example, we were one of the private investors in Sosei Pharmaceuticals, to more recently an investment in a company called Renalis in the IgA nephropathy space, which recently got acquired by Chugai. And then we've also invested in assets coming out of Japan, companies in the US, Mineralis, for example, Cristallis, and others. So we certainly see a symbiotic relationship in terms of investments going both ways. My personal background, also like a lot of us here, mix of scientific and business, operating, and then eventually moving to the investment side of the business. But before SR1, I used to be at Genentech on the R&D side. And in terms of my favorite Japanese food, I might have the most boring choice, since I'm mostly a vegetarian, but veggie tempura is my favorite Japanese.
First of all, Hiroki and team, thanks for having us. It's kind of a homecoming for me. So this is great. I'm enjoying it, especially with my friends from Boston and San Francisco and others. So my name is Shinichiro Fusei. People call me Shin. So I'm from Japanese, as you may guess from my name. But my answer will be pretty boring. It's hard to beat a great sushi. So sushi is my favorite food, Japanese food. So I co-head TPG's Life Science Fund. TPG is well known as a private equity firm. Now it's a pretty diversified investment firm of about 300 billion under management. Unfortunately, our fund is not that big. Our fund is 580. There's 3 partners, including myself, and we're on our first fund. And our sweet spot, we mainly do private investments. Our sweet spot is, I'd say, translational. So we invest usually preclinical, clinical, and then invest to clinical proof of concept. We're pretty agnostic in terms of TA and modalities, although, I at least personally have my favorites. As for my personal background, so I'm from here, and then I did my PhD in immunology. From there, I worked on the company side first at a company called Bluebird Bio. Some of you may remember. So did a lot in cell and gene therapy. I moved to NPM Capital following the chief scientific officer into NPM, co-founded a few companies, one in cell and gene therapy called Elevate Bio, one in the in vivo CAR T space called Orna Therapeutics, and another one in T-cell engagers, and moved to TPG about 4.5 years ago to help start this fund.
Great, thank you. My favorite is sushi, right, by the way. So there's a reason I asked about the Japanese food as well. And investing in a company is similar to choosing like a restaurant, right? You need to know that sushi exists as a cuisine, and then you need to feel that you want to try it, even if it's raw fish. And then you finally decide to go and pick a restaurant and go. So with that framework in mind, I want to start with the awareness. So maybe I'll start with Adam and Rajiv. What do you think Japan is known for today in drug development, and how's Japan perceived from global investors?
I'm still thinking about your sushi analogy and trying to work that in here. Well, just to start by saying that I had the great pleasure, and many of you may know our new Tachi Yamada, who was, of course, involved with us at Fraser, and so kind of grew up with the mindset of the high quality and incredible discipline and science in Japan. And that's really one of the things that led for us, Japan, to be a core strategy. So over the last 10 years, we've started, I think, 4 companies with assets originated here. Everything from the example I said before of a phase 3 asset to things that are much earlier. And so absolutely think it's a core place to go. Ironically, because China comes up a lot. By way of comparison, we've started 1 company out of China, and so that's maybe a small, of course things will change over time, but it's part of our culture to certainly look here.
Maybe I can add a slightly different perspective to the question that was asked in terms of awareness of Japan. So certainly, as was discussed in some of the sessions earlier this afternoon, I would say Japan has a significant lengthy history. Hundreds of years of history in the pharmaceutical industry, which is, we hear about China and some of the other geographies outside of the Western hemisphere. So that is one key piece, right? A huge history of innovation within Japan and then globally, including a number of large pharma global companies that have originated out of Japan. So that's one key piece, I think, for all of us to certainly be thinking about for Japan. The second piece I would say is, and this was also discussed in the earlier sessions, if I think about the ecosystem today, including at the macro level, there is a lot of disruption and volatility, international geopolitics, and so forth. But Japan, at least over the last number of decades, is seen as a stable ecosystem, stable country, and so forth, which I do feel in the day and age we live in is a positive for our ecosystem, which, of course, biotech requires years and years of development for companies to get started and then eventually to hopefully become successful. The third, I would say, where maybe it requires a little bit of work, but in terms of awareness, certainly there's huge knowledge base given the pharmaceutical ecosystem. But the question is, and it's developing, including with the government policies and incentives as discussed. I think that needs to flow into sort of the biotech ecosystem. And that is happening and will continue to happen over time. And then the final piece, capital. I mean, as we've also heard, there is some capital available here. There are local venture capital groups. Maybe we need more of that. But capital is fluid, and you see certainly global capital represented here, which is looking for the best opportunities and so forth in biotech. So I feel as Japan continues to grow, I think there is a place, given the stability of Japan, that it can leverage at this point in time to encourage innovation. Some of the government policies that you just heard about earlier today, I think there's a significant opportunity for Japan to certainly influence the next wave of biotech over the coming years.
Yeah, that was a lot, but you touched on China, and maybe Ben and Brian, how do you think we should differentiate ourselves or position ourselves from countries like China, who's really producing a lot of innovations at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways. I think it's a quality versus quantity argument that you can make too. I think that China is fast at replicating a lot of what is novel out there. I think that Japan, by contrast, can really focus on quality and staying novel and not just becoming a Me Too like China is. I mean, I think they're doing what they're doing in China. They are fast at replicating things, fast at getting things into the clinic. I think there's some learning that can happen here about taking novel concepts and novel technologies into the clinic as fast as you can. But again, I think staying focused on the science, staying novel, I think you can really focus on high quality novel science here. And I think that's already something that Japan does well and is known for, generating high quality data, being very transparent, being a trusted partner, as Rajiv talked about. I think deepening that is going to differentiate you versus a player that is formidable in the space. I think we all know that as soon as a patent is registered and it's seen globally, there's a lot of Me Too's and copycats that are being generated in China. I think, again, staying true to the science here and the high quality research and development that we see here is going to be important there.
Yeah, so I agree with most of that. I think the key differentiator I think that China has right now is really rapid clinical development. And everyone is trying to catch up with that. And I think there is a lot for the United States and Japan, in fact, all developed countries to do to try and streamline some of the ways in which a medicine can get to volunteers and can get to patients. But I don't think that's a place where it is likely that we're going to win. So I do think that victory has to come through innovation. I think that's the only way. I think it also has to come from taking a really long time before you publish your work. So I would recommend that to everyone.
Thank you. And Shin, do you have anything to add, especially what might be underappreciated from Japanese ecosystem?
Yeah, so that's a great question and a hard one, given that this is a pretty sophisticated crowd, I'd say. But I did think about it. I think there's three things that I'll mention. One is, at a macro level, looking from the outside in, you see the prime ministers changing like every year, right? So with all these initiatives going on that you heard about, will this continue? I will say one thing that I think people might not appreciate is that the people that are in the government who are actually working on these initiatives, and I see a few people in the room that have known for several years now, have not changed. So maybe the heads of the state may change, but I do believe that the efforts to continue to expand the ecosystem will continue. So that's one. Second, I'll make a comment about the regulators, the PMDA. And again, like before I met the people at the PMDA, I thought it was, a relatively conservative organization. But if you actually talk and go and speak to, for example, Fujiwara Sensei, which some of us did yesterday, you'll get a very different opinion. I think there's a major effort to change things here, and things may take time, but the effort to change and the desire to change is here. And the third thing I will mention is the talent pool. For those of us in the U.S. and Europe, thinking about investing in Japan, one of the concerns might be, how do we hire? How do we manage the talent pool here? Well, I will say, living in Boston, seen and interacted with a lot of people coming from Japanese pharmaceutical companies, and I see a few people here. They spend a few years in the U.S., meet people, and go back. They, I think, can act as a bridge. I'm actually talking to people like you as well. So, I'd say, if you are thinking about, establishing a presence here, I'd take advantage of that talent pool.
Thank you. Maybe we move from awareness to activation. So, Ben and Brian, what makes you go from interesting, I'm aware that the market exists, to let's spend some time and resources in this market? Maybe Ben, Brian?
Well, I think we're there now, right? I think that almost every global life science investor really is looking for good drugs and really looking hard because they're so rare. And so there's almost no geography you won't go to. The question is really sort of how you segregate your effort, like where do you really focus? And that's usually driven by relationship and opportunity. And so I think that it's, different firms are in different places. I was actually unaware of how much Fraser had done in Japan, and that's like a great example. But it was built probably largely on Tachi, right? And so that human interaction is the basis for companies and probably multiple approved drugs, right? And so that's, I think, where all of these things start. But I think everyone is aware of Japan at this point.
And I'd say the good thing is, I think, to your point, we are all looking for great drugs, and it is a meritocracy. If you have great data and show that you're differentiated and that you have truly a novel platform or product, you have to get the word out there. It's a meritocracy, but you still need the mouthpiece to get out there. And to the point around relationships, they're critical. It's a big part of it. There are groups, like yourself, Hiroki, and Catalyst Pacific, and others who are trying to bridge that, and I think do a good job. But I think our awareness of the top 50 or 100 private Japanese biotechs, I would say, does happen to be low. And so we take meetings here and there, but if there was an aggregated list that we were reviewing or that was going around, that would be huge. And I think, again, just getting the word out there about, hey, this is a novel technologic breakthrough. It should be published in international journals and presented at international conferences ideally. But I know that's not always the case. There might be a lot of local talent here and local interactions, but that does need to be globalized.
And do you think initiatives like AIMED's matching fund, does that help? And Shin, you were recently qualified for AIMED, but does that help to activate activities?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge incentive. I mean, don't you think? Right?
It's hugely valuable.
Yeah, I mean,
so I think many of our companies are still seeing sort of what happens, but it is an incredibly powerful incentive.
Yes.
And it enables, I think, different types of companies to be built, actually. Yeah. If it's something that you could reliably know for a certain type of company with a certain type of intellectual property or provenance could get it, it would actually, I think, enable sort of different styles of company build.
But going back to that human relationship thing, right? So as we start looking for projects, at least for me, what's critical is that connection with the investors and the local players that really have the ground level knowledge, whether it's AN Ventures, whether it's 8 Roads. Having that bridge is critical. And these events actually are very helpful because we get to know each other, right? And it takes time to build that relationship.
And if I can just add one piece on the AMED program, I think as was discussed just a few minutes ago, China and the dynamic that has created in terms of, for now, Me Too's, but really getting to that early clinical proof of concept very quickly and on a very cost-efficient basis. At least, for example, in the venture ecosystem and even in the pharmaceutical ecosystem, when we chat with global pharma heads of R&D, for example, they bring up two key things on their mind. One is China, one is AI, including sort of their thinking about how that dynamic may impact their business. And certainly all of us on the biotech side are also. So given venture capital dollars or yen has a relatively high cost of capital, but through programs and initiatives such as the IMED program, if that can be lowered, i.e. in terms of maximizing efficiency on venture capital dollars invested to get to that early clinical inflection point, I think that's a huge incentive for venture capital groups to consider efforts here to get that clinical data and then eventually branching out globally.
Yeah, just to add, I was really struck this morning. Mike spoke at I think it was called RegCell, about how they structured their kind of recap their company and structured in the division of labor between the United States and Japan, and kind of really optimizing for what both skill sets were best at. And so between the grant program, but it's a higher burden for U.S. venture capitals in general to invest in other jurisdictions, and so that would be a great way to kind of, it could be a U.S. based investment paired with a grant, and you probably could go much quickly that way. So I thought that was a great.
That is a great point, and I think Dan is somewhere, right? Like Shinobi is another example of this, and the research here is great. And the other thing is, the turnover isn't as high. So, but the key is, like, do you have that talent that can manage it's true of any country, but it's definitely true of Japan as well. So that talent to manage both sides of the Pacific, I think that's the part that, you kind of need to work on. But yeah, it's a great model.
Can I go back to my restaurant analogy? So I think we are now aware that Japan exists as a market, and you decide that you want to eat sushi, and you're looking for a place, but you're choosing the place right now. And what do you think determines which restaurant to go in? I mean, that's similar to Biotech. It could be the price, the menu, the appearance of the shop. There's so many things, right? And in my mind, spending about 8-9 years in the market, I think the biggest challenge is how people package company science, right? It's good quality science, but it's still not in an investable form, I guess. So maybe, Shin, what are the gaps between US top biotechs and biotechs emerging in an emerging market like Japan? Are there any key differences that you think?
I'll say a few things, although I do think it does take time, but it is improving for sure. I think a couple of things. One, I'll mention two things. One is when we speak to some of the companies to the point of proof of concept, right? Getting to that proof of concept, really clarifying the point that they're trying to get to, that value inflection point, what that data looks like, which population it is, what's the competition, and how you need to differentiate, and the money to get there, right? Like that path. The top companies can do that really quickly. The top management teams can do that very quickly in the first 5 to 10 minutes in a pitch. I think that's a little lacking, and that's not just of Japanese companies. I think a lot of US companies, European companies lack that ability, but really defining that TPP and the path to get there, right? That's the first one. I think the second thing that does make it a little bit harder to invest in is that, going back to the human interactions and this being a people business, it's much easier to invest in a company where you recognize the people in the company. Right? Oh yeah, I've invested in Adam's company, and he made a lot of money. Of course, I'll invest again. That kind of familiarity, and I know it's not fair, but is lacking. So whether you can kind of have these types of cross-Pacific teams to bridge that might be one way to do it. But I think those are two that come to mind. I don't know if anybody else has anything, but
I think there's a way to bridge that too if you haven't launched a company in the past or aren't a natural entrepreneur. But I think the pharma ecosystem is so strong here that if you do have the experience that you've worked on multiple programs that have gotten to FDA approval, and you have that experience too, even though you might not have made it on the you might not have sold a company on the private side, I think you can bolster those credentials by showing that you've done things outside of academia, shown that if you've worked in pharma. I think there's a lot of great talent here that's worked in pharma and launched several drugs, taken them all the way through clinical development and into through PMDA and FDA approval. So I think leveraging that experience also instantly builds credibility if you worked on 10 different programs that have been, that have ultimately made it to the commercial stage.
I mean, I do think that this is maybe diverges from your restaurant analogy a little, because you really want a restaurant with a great clinical development plan. And that's the reality. I think you said it is like the human experiment that proves that this medicine does what you think it's going to do and that matters is usually the crux of any translational investment. And it's very often when you're an early stage founder, sort of your pre-development candidate, you're so focused on like, how am I going to do the chemistry or screen the antibody or whatever it is, that you can lose your focus on that question. And that is actually the question that most translational venture capital groups really want to know the answer to. So that is, I think, the one thing that is most, and I'd say not just in Japan, but generally, it is a failing that they don't say, this is the human experiment and it's going to cost X million dollars. And I think that, and having a good sense of why we believe that's true, why we believe it's going to work, I think that's sort of the core thing I would tell most founders to focus on.
My reaction is that there's no fundamental difference in how things are packaged here versus other situations. I mean, of course, it depends on the experience of the people involved. But I go back to Brian's point, which is relative to China as an example. I mean, we're inundated with opportunities, and there's continuous outreach on what's available versus at least recently for me personally, I'm just not nearly as aware of and it's why I'm here actually, is to continue and reestablish the connection. And I can just say, and I'm sure it's true for all of us, we want to hear about the good ideas. Don't be shy and reach out with them. And part of our collective jobs is to help package and put the stories together. And so we just encourage the group that if you have access to an asset from a pharmaceutical company you used to work in, or you've been working with an academic and you think you're ready to raise money, of course, there's a great ecosystem here as well, but we would love to hear about them.
Thank you. And the point, Brian, you raised about trying to pull out people from pharmaceutical companies, how do you think that can be done? Because there's a chicken and egg problem, because it's high risky. There's not many success story, and you don't want to go out from your comfort zone. And how do you think we should change that? And I know this wasn't on the question list I gave you, but any ideas? Or I know that I think. So one of the co-founders I'm working with, he's from Takeda Pharmaceuticals, and he just said, I want to do startup. And that's great, but how do we increase the number of those kind of people? Any ideas?
I do think it is a chicken or the egg issue here, where there aren't as many people. I think if you had a few early success stories where it was clear that, taking that risk, it is a very American thing to take that risk, leave potentially well-paying job on a career path at a large pharmaceutical company. I think it involves a lot of the ecosystem has to be here to support it too. I think seeing that you're going to you'll own a significant percentage of the company if you take that risk, and it could be very valuable for you. And I think looking to the U.S. and seeing how that is, life altering or game changing if you do take that risk from an economic perspective. I think using a lot of the U.S. examples, but why couldn't that be done here? Why couldn't the economics be structured such that it is a leap of faith, but it is one where you will be rewarded for it, and you're also gaining experience that you could take to really any future biotech companies. I mean, a lot of them fail. We all know that, but in America and in many places in the world, that's okay. Then you can move on to the next one. You learn something from that. You'll still have the long experience that you had within a pharmaceutical company that you can always take with you to the next one.
And I'll just add, even other parts of the world, like even in the US, this type of culture has taken a while to build. And we would say this type of question also applies to maybe parts of Europe and so forth, where talent, entrepreneurial talent, it is a question. And it has become better there, whether it's UK, Europe in general, over the last 10, 20 years, as sort of that part of the ecosystem globally has worked on this. And to the point, one of the point Brian made, I think there's also a cultural piece, i.e. for an individual to be willing to take risk, jump from a larger organization to a smaller organization where the probability of success may not be that high. If that effort does fail, culturally, the ecosystem has to say, you know what, I won't hold that against that individual. It was worth a shot, didn't work, and give that individual another shot.
Yeah.
Maybe finance.
I was just going to say exactly that, because one of the things that is really very frightening when you go out to start something new is you've left your job and it can fail. And one of the things that's actually very important about like the Boston ecosystem is if you go to a large pharmaceutical company, if you go to Takeda in Boston, if you go to Biogen in Boston, and you say, actually, my last job was at a company that blew up, like you can still get a job. You can go back into the large pharma ecosystem. And I think that that's something that's actually useful for the large pharmas to tell people. Now, obviously, you don't want to encourage your best people to leave, so it's a little bit of a problem, but you do want them to feel that if they do this, there's actually a place for them back. And that's something that large companies can do, and that, that's something that has changed. Like, this is why people live in California and Boston. It's because if this thing blows up, there'll be another place for me.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say is, so, as a, person coming from Japan and living in Boston, I do hear a lot of people say, oh, it'll be hard to do it in Japan because of the culture. It's partially true. Although if you look on the tech side of things, that ecosystem has developed. You do see people leaving large companies and going to tech startups, partially because of the success case, cases that's been around and the economic incentives that's created for these people to leave the large companies. So I think it does come to like a few success cases and kind of people inside the pharma companies seeing that and then wanting to leave. So once that happens, it kind of starts the flywheel, I feel like.
Just to share a story. So I live in San Diego. In San Diego, the first success in San Diego was a company called Biotech, which was the PSA test. And it was all these folks took risks. They left big pharma. A lot of them came from Lilly. And to this day, every couple of years, there'll be a newspaper story that shows the lineage that came out of Biotech, and they went on to start literally hundreds of companies and create so much wealth. So I just couldn't agree more strongly. You just need the one, and then you are able to teach what you learned. And even coming out of pharma in the US or Europe, there's a huge learning curve, and the hit rate can be low, independent of geography, just because there's so much to learn. But then you teach the next folks, you teach how to position products, and so you just gotta get lucky and start somewhere.
Thank you. So maybe going back to the clinical plan you mentioned, Ben, and also some of the fundraising and design and how you meet the inflection point, increase the company value. I think it's extremely hard for, let's say, people from pharmaceutical companies or who haven't done biotechs before to design that from scratch, especially in an emerging ecosystem like ours? And who do you think we should rely on? Is it the local partners? Is it the global VCs? Who do you think we should rely on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably all of those subparts of the ecosystem, correct? So, I mean, at the very simple level, I would say for a lot of venture capitalists, certainly there's some who will start companies and or invest very early, i.e. at the discovery stage, but those are few and far in between, generally speaking. So the first key inflection point for entrepreneurs to, I think, really have a shot at getting venture capital investment is having a development candidate. That would be generally one inflection point preclinically, or a molecule with some in vivo data in animals. The second would be maybe an IND or equivalent getting into the clinic, but it's really early clinical data. That's when another significant subset of venture capital investors get interested. And then, of course, at a later time would be some clinical proof of concept, phase 2, phase 1b, phase 2 data, etc. So whatever can be done in the ecosystem, pharma company folks helping academic professors, etc., to understand this, to help them design experiments, to de-risk whether it's a biology, and get to this stage. And then we've heard through various government incentives, grants, etc., to get to some of these key inflection points to then maximize the probability that venture capital dollars do get interested.
2 points I'll make about that. I actually think that's another area where Japan can really compete with China. I think China is very good at replicating phase 1 trial designs. And when things get a little bit more challenging, novel endpoints in phase 2s, how to design those properly, if you're breaking new ground and not just replicating past approvals, again, relying on the infrastructure that's here, the legacy pharmaceutical companies that have been around a long time and have achieved many FDA and PMDA approvals, working with those folks closely. Hopefully you can collaborate with a lot of those companies locally who have done that and who've broken new ground on new endpoint selection, new FDA approvals and new indications. Again, relying on that local talent that I think does exist in ways that you're leveraging that against China, where it's not just, okay, we're going to run the exact same study that others have run.
Yeah. So I'll make, just on that topic, a plug for Curie, at least for our seed fund, which is if you send Curie a seed idea, they will always tell you why they said no. So they may not say yes. In fact, they probably won't say yes. But they will give you a note which says, this is why we're saying no. Maybe if you generated data that looked like this, we might say yes. And my fund doesn't do that, just for the record, but they do. And it's phenomenal. And so you will get a detailed, like, here's what we would have needed to see. And that's, it's one group's opinion. It could be wrong, but you'll get that. So that's one thing you can do. And I've actually found more often than not, venture capitalists want companies to succeed. And so that's something that Curie does consistently. But I bet that everybody on this panel has done exactly that for a company that they knew they were never going to invest in, but they said, look, this is actually what it would have to look like. So I'd say just try to make that connection and have the conversation, and you may get an answer.
Or on the contrary, actually, at TPG and at MPM, and I know this happens at all the other funds as well, a lot of the companies that we've invested in the past, actually, we might have said no first time, right? And then exactly to your point, you kind of say, hey, like, we want to see this data. And then they come back. And then, it might lead to a yes. So yeah, I agree.
And if you don't get that feedback in writing, feel free to ask for it too. I think that, we're spending time with a lot of the companies, a lot of your competitors potentially. And so we've seen a lot of data sets that you might be interested in leveraging, at least how we think about that. Because I think it is valuable feedback that not everybody gets. And, I'm always happy to. I think a lot of us are happy to pay it forward and explain exactly why we're passing and what we need to see.
Anything to add, Adam?
What's going through my mind is, of course, if you have a fully baked story and you have the clinical development plan figured out and couldn't agree, you're radically improving your probability of success. So completely agree with the point. But a different way of thinking about it too is it's okay to not know everything, particularly depending on what part of the business you are in. And everyone on this panel, I'm sure, if you called and said, I have this differentiated chemical matter and I'm a preclinical person and I don't know how to develop this into a drug, people would dig in and help you do that as well. So, there's an old adage that it's, you're looking for more than money. You're looking for partnership. You're looking for, thought partners, people that are connected, can help you build those teams. And so, there's a balance. You, of course, want to go as prepared as you can be, but I wouldn't let the lack of the ability to get to the right resources mean that you don't reach out.
And switching gears a little bit, how important are local partners here, whether they are VCs, consultants, or how do you think they play a role in an emerging ecosystem like ours?
I mean, I can get us started on that. We don't have a presence in Japan, even though we've invested in Japan, as I mentioned in my introduction. I would say for situations such as ours, where we don't have local individuals, local partners are critical. Both in terms of, I think, as Shin mentioned, having somebody you may know to build that trust factor, but also just making sure you have a sense, a more detailed sense via that partner of the particular ecosystem. And then if, given we may be many thousands of miles away, if some issue comes up in a company, we can respond, but leveraging that local partner to maybe respond even faster, having a local thought partner is critical. So I think that's certainly an opportunity in terms of the local venture groups to continue to partner with global venture groups. And as we're seeing, global venture groups are registering, maybe they will have a local presence, but a significant opportunity for them.
Yeah, 100%. And I don't think it's any different for any geography. If we have a company that has a presence in China, we absolutely need a Chinese partner. Same thing with, England, wherever. But yeah, for here, it'll be hard for me to imagine a syndicate without somebody, a Japanese investor that has the local knowledge.
Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say as another firm that doesn't have a med designation and doesn't have boots on the ground here, we do have an office in India, but obviously it's pretty far away from here, and they don't really do much biotech. But I would say that, I mean, having the designation is huge, and I would almost use that list as a way to access a lot of the syndicate partners that a lot of those firms. We've syndicated deals with a lot of the firms up here. They can reach out to their networks. It's almost like using the AMED list that was up on the map earlier. If you're out raising capital, start there. And then I know every time we see a Japanese deal and we know that there would be AMED designation involved and that's going to extend runway, it's always a badge of honor for that deal and a positive thing as we think about more non-dilutive capital coming into the company. It's a very positive thing overall.
Any advice to local partners how they could engage with global investors like yourselves?
I mean, I think as was mentioned, while certainly in our business collectively there's technology involved, but in the end it is a people business. So I think whether it's for us, like it's we're motivated to get to know local partners, whether it's parts of the university ecosystem, whether it's Japanese-based venture capital groups, etc. Similarly, I think there are many venture capital groups that reach out to us and all of the folks here as they continue to explore, and maybe the companies they're investing in require additional rounds of capital and expand globally. So it does work both ways. In terms of us connecting with the local partners and vice versa. But as was mentioned, that is a critical piece, I think, of continuity that is helpful to maintain.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly about the people part of this as well. So I grew up doing business development, and I remember getting started, and there were all kinds of companies where I didn't know the decision makers. But you spend just a little bit of time and you're just a couple links or a link away from someone who would be trusted by that group. And so I think despite my comment that we want to see everything, it would be so much more powerful to get an intro from someone we worked with before. And again, that should be easy enough with the internet for anyone to do.
I would say too, making it as efficient as possible too. I think local partners, there's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of companies that might be out raising. I think, bringing them together. This is a great forum for that. This has been a great 2-day forum so far for that. We're all clearly interested in the region. So I think starting with outreach, but I think if multiple companies, came together and said, look, we're going to set up a meeting. Would you like to join? We're going to do this quarterly via Zoom or something like that. And we'll have rotating companies who are out raising in that time period, do brief pitches. You could do something like that. So I think there's ways I think we're open for business. We're looking for great opportunities. So setting something like that up as a local partner would be great.
Yeah. One thing that's really helped, maybe partly because I'm Japanese, but I've definitely started to realize that there are more and more investor groups or corporate venture groups that have 1 or 2 people in Boston. And me being in Boston, it's much easier to meet in person. That really helps build a relationship. And FDI has Thai in Boston, and we have our local Arlington coffee group now, and just kind of seeing the same faces over and over, it really helps. And I will say, one thing about the corporate venture groups, sometimes they have this rotation system. I understand that it is part of the training, but sometimes it does make it hard. Like, you get to know somebody at, I'll just make this up, right? Like I don't know, like a Stalls or somewhere, like a venture group. And, you get to know them, you go out to drinks with them and for several years, but then they rotate back to Japan. And then a new person comes in. And while you kind of know the organization, it's a new relationship, right? That is one hurdle I've definitely experienced in the past. Same thing with BD, by the way. But again, continuation is actually key.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's at least one pharma company that is setting up and has set up over the last 2 or 3 years, sort of a showcase in Boston. They'll make a pitch for San Francisco. It's got better weather than Boston. But so certainly events like that in terms of building awareness from the ecosystem here to the ecosystem in other parts of the world. And once again, as was discussed, even though maybe for one particular investment group, a company may be too early, but at least the entrepreneurs involved have met with the investment folks. They've gotten to know each other a little bit so that next time as the company makes progress, they can reach out again, and it's not an unknown quantity and so forth. So this is a long-term business. But certainly events such as this and or events in other parts of the world to continue to maintain that connectivity, grow that connectivity can be helpful.
So we have several minutes left. I want to open it up to the floor. Any questions? Sales on at the back.
Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation or discussions. I actually agree with early proof of concept wholeheartedly because that's, I think, what's really missing in Japan, especially in clinical settings. So I want to get in sort of an entirety. Every VCs outside of Japan, I ask, when it says we'll be interested in this and that, most of them will say, well, in Japan, it's kind of get the ROI in place. And to some extent, that's probably true, right? And I guess Shin, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, but you mentioned about one call away or someone that is very close. You say it's not fair, but that's the fact, right? So now you are engaged in cross-border investment or have done a cross-border investment, but that part, the geographical barriers are still missing. And in all days, in the last 20 years, we have been using this as an excuse, cultures, this and that, which I think is old. That's old. So from your perspective, in order to maximize the cross-border investment, provided that there's a geographical barriers, how do you think you will be able to overcome this? Yes, there's a Zoom call. Yes, you have a Japanese subsidiary or Japanese partners, but there's oftentimes lost in translation that I'm sure you are familiar with. And how do you how can you overcome that issues? If you can address some of those, that would be great.
Maybe I can get us started. I mean, there are a number of groups here that have invested, both in Japan and do invest globally. So I would say relative to 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, the geographical distances don't matter as much. And, while certainly we see a lot of deals, but we want to see the best deals, as do groups here. So everybody, I think maybe Adam or somebody mentioned, we want to find the best opportunities, and we may be seeing 100 opportunities a week out of China, but most of them don't make sense. So it's up to us also to find opportunities which are relatively unique, and there is competition even amongst us, even though we all work together too. So I think it's not necessarily a constraint that a company is in Japan, but certainly connectivity through local partners and or otherwise is helpful, and events such as this, can provide some of that. The meetings that I think all of us had this morning, and so forth. And certainly, the capital in this day and age is mobile. There's no constraint there, generally speaking, and actually maybe less constraint in Japan than certain geographies such as China, which is a plus for the local ecosystem here.
Yes, I agree with that. But unfortunately, there are I shouldn't say million, there are hundreds of biotech, right, who are struggling because they can't go to the United States, either they can't speak English. That I think is out of questions. But someone who can even speak English, logistically, they won't be able to get connected, going to the United States. Yes, that requires some entrepreneurship and some challenges, but that path is not there. And with that, I think it's hard. It's even harder whether you do the Zoom call. Yes, you can do it once you know them. But if you don't know them, how do you deal with it?
There's no answer other than persistence,
Yeah.
right? There's actually no answer other than just to put in the work. I actually find California pretty culturally alien, to be honest. Silicon Valley is really weird to me. But you have to find these people, and then you go on LinkedIn and you say, do I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody? And you just have to work it. And there's actually, unfortunately, no answer other than that.
I wasn't going to call out Silicon Valley, but actually that's not really a Japan-specific issue, right? And the good management teams will find a way to connect. I think that's part of the job of the management team, to find a warm intro to the investors you want to talk to.
But there are maybe just one point I'll finish up with. It is absolutely a challenge for an early stage entrepreneur, etc., to get connected. But there are means such as this, or maybe going. As an example, to the Bio conference that's held every year, right, where there are, of course, pharmaceutical partners, but there are many venture capital folks that go there. Etc., etc. So it is one of the hurdles, and that's not unique to Japan, but just entrepreneurs in general have to do to try to build that connectivity, and then it may take a while, but that is the reality of.
This is actually one of the reason I brought up the first point in the question about the underappreciated parts of Japan is that I think there is a lot more connectivity. Like, having been in Boston for several for a while, I've definitely seen the evolution, and especially not just the pharma groups, but also the Japan-based, VC firms have made exceptional efforts to connect. They've syndicated with a bunch of us, and I think that connectivity is increasing. So I think there are paths, and as part of the management team of the early stage startup, I think it is your job to find that path.
And as an organizer, I'm happy to announce that we'll have this kind of event every year, hopefully, and get people, not just for cherry blossoms, but really to interact and do one-on-ones, and that's the whole goal. But I do agree with your view, and unfortunately, our time is up. But I think this has been really insightful discussion. We got you to try the sushi, so let's see whether we can make you interested in investing in biotechs. Yeah, so thank you so much, everyone. And please, join me in giving a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashida, and all the panelists. Please give them a big round of applause again. This concludes the VC panel.